You just read those words without even trying. Didn't sound them out, didn't stop to think about the grammar. The meaning just arrived. Little shapes on a screen became ideas inside your head, and you didn't have to work for it at all. Now here's a question that sounds almost too simple, until you actually try to answer it. How did anyone come up with this in the first place? Not writing. Writing is easy to explain. Somebody scratched marks in clay a few thousand years ago, and we can dig those marks up. I mean the thing underneath writing, the talking. The moment a sound coming out of one creature's mouth started to mean something inside another creature's mind. Who invented that? When? And how do you even invent a thing when there's no word yet for word? Sit with that for a second, because the deeper you go, the stranger it gets. This goes back further than farming, further than cities, further than writing, further than the wheel. This might go back further than our own species. And the truly odd part? We're not sure. We have the genes, we have the bones, we have the throat that makes the sounds, and we still can't point to the first sentence because sentences don't fossilize. Air doesn't leave a trace. So we're detectives at a crime scene where the most important evidence evaporated 100,000 years ago. There are really two questions tangled together here. First, the simple one, when did the human body become physically able to speak? And second, the far more interesting one, when did we actually start? Because as you're about to find out, those two answers might be tens of thousands of years apart. And that gap is where the whole mystery lives. To understand any of it, you have to picture the world before it existed. And that's harder than it sounds because you've never once experienced it. Before you can have language, you need something to say it with, and someone to say it to. But you also need something most people never think about. You need the idea that a sound can stand for a thing. That's not obvious. That's not automatic. A dog barks when it's scared, but the bark doesn't mean there's a specific man by the gate whom I saw yesterday. It just means fear. Raw feeling, pushed straight out. The leap from that to a word is the single biggest leap in the story of our minds. So picture it. A group of early humans, hundreds of thousands of years ago. The sun goes down and there is no light except fire. There is cold and hunger and the sound of things moving in the dark that you cannot name. Because there are no names yet, you feel everything a modern person feels. Fear, love, grief, the urge to warn the person next to you. But it's all trapped inside your skull. You can point, you can grunt, you can grab someone's arm. And that's the ceiling. Everything you know dies with you because there's no way to pour it into another head. And then, somewhere, in some group we'll never identify, something changed. Here's where the detective work starts, and here's the first surprise. To find out when we could speak, scientists went looking not in the mouth, but in the DNA. In 2025, a team led by the linguist Shigeru Miyagawa at MIT, working with researchers from the American Museum of Natural History, tried something clever. They reasoned that since all human languages likely share a common origin, the key question is how far back in time human populations first began splitting apart. Think about the logic. Every language on Earth today, all 7,000 of them, seems to trace back to one source. So whenever the first human groups wandered away from each other and stopped mixing, they must have already had the capacity for language, because they all carried it with them. And when did that first split happen? Their analysis of the genetic evidence pointed to at least 135,000 years ago. That's the answer to the first question. By 135,000 years ago, the human brain was already wired for it. But, and this is the good part, being able to speak isn't the same as speaking. You have the capacity to do a backflip too, technically. Doesn't mean you're doing one. So when did we actually start using it? That's where it gets strange. Because the same researchers think there's a gap. Around 100,000 years ago, sites across Africa and the Middle East showed a sudden burst of symbolic behavior, abstract thinking, shared meaning, the hallmarks of a mind that's using language to build a culture. Beads, pigment, patterns carved for no practical reason. Suddenly humans are making things that only make sense if you can talk about them. So the capacity showed up, and then tens of thousands of years may have passed before it fully caught fire. And one of the people behind this idea, the paleoanthropologist Ian Tattersall, pushes it even further. He argues language wasn't just a result of us getting smarter. He thinks it was the trigger, that once language emerged, it set off a cascade of everything else. Symbolic art, complex social structures, the whole explosion of the modern mind. Language was the trigger for modern human behavior, Miyagawa put it. Somehow it stimulated human thinking. In other words, we didn't get clever and then invent language. We invented language, and that's what made us clever. Now hold on, because there's a rival camp, and they'd tell you that number is far too old. Not everyone buys 135,000 years. A linguist named George Poulos, who spent his whole career on the sound structures of African languages, looked at the same puzzle from the angle of the actual noises the mouth can make. His conclusion, the very first speech sounds were uttered around 70,000 years ago. Not hundreds of thousands, as is often claimed. And the full range of human speech sounds, all the vowels and consonants we juggle without thinking, didn't come together until roughly 50,000 years ago. So which is it? 135,000 or 70,000? Here's the honest answer, and it's more interesting than either number alone. Nobody has settled it. One camp reads the genes and sees deed time. The other reads the sounds and sees something much more recent. That's not a flaw in science. That's the science working. Two different kinds of evidence, pointing at two different moments, and the truth sitting somewhere in the argument between them. When someone hands you a single confident date for the first word, that's exactly when you should raise an eyebrow. But all of this is about us, Homo sapiens. And this is where the whole story cracks wide open, because it turns out we might not have been the only ones talking. Meet FOXP2. For about 2 decades, it was famous as the language gene, and the nickname stuck for a reason. People born with a mutation in FOXP2 have serious speech and language problems, and the gene turned out to be involved in vocal learning even in songbirds. It's one of the most conserved genes across all mammals. But at some point after we split from chimpanzees, 2 tiny changes fixed themselves into the human version. 2 swapped building blocks. Scientists got very excited. Maybe this was the switch. Maybe this was the moment a pre-human became a human who could talk, and then came the twist that nobody wanted. In 2007, researchers sequenced the FOXP2 gene from Neanderthal bones, our extinct cousins, the cavemen of every bad movie, and they found that Neanderthals carried the exact same 2 changes we do. Read that again. The supposed language gene that made us special, they had it too, which means those changes are older than the common ancestor we share with Neanderthals, who lived somewhere around 300,000 to 400,000 years ago. You're telling me the Neanderthals had the machinery for speech? The available evidence says quite possibly yes. But here's the reversal on the reversal, and it's a lesson in not falling in love with a neat story. FOXP2 turned out not to be the magic switch after all. In 2019, a study in the journal Cell found no evidence that the gene spread through humans in one sudden sweeping event the way everyone had assumed. Later work showed FOXP2 doesn't act alone at all. Genes with names like ROBO1 and ARBO2 and CNT-NAP2 changed in humans after we parted ways with the Neanderthals, and those are now the promising suspects. Language isn't one gene flipping on. It's a whole orchestra, and we're still figuring out who's playing what. So, the genes hint that Neanderthals could have spoken. But could they physically make the sounds? For that, you need a bone. Deep in your throat, right now, there's a small horseshoe-shaped bone called the hyoid. It's strange. It's the only bone in your body that doesn't connect to any other bone. It floats, anchored by muscle, and it's the scaffold your tongue and larynx hang from. No proper hyoid, no speech. For a long time, we had no idea what a Neanderthal hyoid looked like, so the debate ran on guesses. Then, in a cave called Kabara on Mount Carmel in Israel, they found one. A Neanderthal hyoid bone roughly 60,000 years old, reported in the journal Nature in 1989. And when the researchers looked at it, they were shocked. It was almost identical in size and shape to the hyoid bone sitting in your throat this very second. Later scientists went further, scanning its internal structure, the microscopic architecture inside the bone, which reshapes itself based on how a bone is actually used in life. And even that was consistent with a capacity for speech. Think about what that means. A creature we've spent a century drawing as a grunting brute had the throat, and quite possibly the words. And now, here's the honest part, the part that keeps this from being a fairy tale. A modern-looking bone doesn't prove a single word was ever spoken. As the researchers themselves admitted, having the same shape doesn't guarantee it was used the same way. The great Noam Chomsky and others have argued for years that Neanderthals still lacked the deeper cognitive spark, the ability to nest ideas inside ideas, the recursion that lets you say, I know that you know that I'm lying. That's the thing that separates a call from a conversation. And you can't dig that out of the ground. It doesn't leave a bone. Which brings us to the deepest problem in this entire field, the one that haunts every answer. Organic things rot. Wood, skin, rope, and especially sound. They vanish in the blink of an eye, geologically speaking. Stone lasts forever. So we find the stone tools and assume that's the whole story, when the whole story might have been made of words that drifted off into the air of an ice age night and were simply gone. The absence of proof is not proof of absence. Every silent skull we pull from the dirt might have been mid-sentence. There's one last layer, and I saved it for the end, because it's the strangest idea of all. What if the first language wasn't spoken at all? There's a serious theory, backed by real neuroscience, called the gestural origin theory. The idea, which goes all the way back to 18th century philosophers, is that spoken language evolved out of an older system of communication made of hand gestures. And it's not just a hunch. In the brains of monkeys, scientists found neurons that fire both when the animal grasps something with its hand and when it moves its mouth. A deep, ancient link between the hand and the lips wired right into the primate brain. In humans, even now, the way you grasp an object subtly changes the shape of your mouth and the sound of your voice. So the first words may have been things people did with their hands, pointing, shaping, miming, and slowly, over unimaginable stretches of time, the mouth joined in and took over, until the gesture faded and the sound carried the meaning on its own. And here's why that should give you a small chill. You still do it. When you talk on the phone, when the other person literally cannot see you, your hands still move. You gesture at nobody. You've probably done it today. That's not a habit you picked up. That may be the oldest layer of human communication, tens of thousands of years deep, still running underneath the words. Your hands are speaking a language your mouth replaced, and they never got the message to stop. So, how did humans invent language? The honest, satisfying answer is that nobody invented it, and that's what makes it miraculous. There was no genius, no first word, no single morning when a caveman said the world's first sentence. It welled up, slowly, out of gestures and cries and the slow rewiring of a brain over hundreds of thousands of years. Somewhere before 135,000 years ago, the capacity was already there, writing in our DNA. By around 100,000 years ago, the beads and the pigment and the symbols say we were using it to build whole worlds inside each other's heads. Maybe as late as 70,000 years ago, the full range of sounds locked into place. And the whole time, we probably weren't alone. The Neanderthals had the gene and the throat, and maybe in their own caves, their own words we'll never hear. They pointed. Then they cried out. Then they shaped the cry into meaning. And the moment they did, something impossible happened. A thought could jump from one dying mind into another and survive. That's what language really is. It's the first technology we ever built for cheating death. Everything you know, everything anyone taught you, every story older than you are, all of it reached you because one ancestor found a way to put the inside of their head into the air. So here's that simple question one last time, the one that sounded almost too easy to bother asking. How did anyone come up with this? Look down at your own hands the next time you're talking to someone. Watch them move on their own, shaping the air, saying what your mouth is already saying. 100,000 years ago, that gesture was the sentence. It's still there, still running, still reaching for the person in front of you. You never invented language. You inherited it.